Okay, yesterday we learned the Mishnah. It's the first Mishnah of Gemara Hameiniach. It's the third parak of Baba Kama again. And the Mishnah told us two halachas, which is basically the same point. The two halachas were that if someone put something down in public property, we called it a kad, means a pitcher, and someone came along and broke it. So because it wasn't supposed to be there, the person who broke it doesn't have to pay for it. The next thing we learned was that if the person does get damaged by it, so then the owner has to pay, the owner of the pitcher, over here it's called the owner of the chavis, of the barrel, has to pay for the damages. And the point is the same because he wasn't supposed to put it there. So he doesn't get paid for it when it's broken. He wasn't supposed to put it there. And he also has to pay if it causes damage because he wasn't supposed to put it there. It's his fault. Okay, now we're going to learn the Gemara. And it begins right here. I put on the side, if you can see that, I put the terminology. We learned two things in the class today. Two new terms, Gemara terms. And both of them are going to be repeated a few times today. The first term is pasach be, and I left that blank, v'siyem be, which means that the Mishnah begins with saying one thing, and it concludes, v'siyem means concludes, with something else. And in our Mishnah, I pointed out that the kad is what it begins with. We're talking about a pitcher. It's a type of container. It's a kad. And it concludes with another type of container, a chavis. And we're talking about the same thing. So why does it switch names for the same container? So the Gemara asks, and the Gemara says, pasach bekad. It begins with a kad. This would be the ... in our terminology. We just filled it in. If it would be Mad Libs, Gemara Mad Libs, so we just filled it in. Enter a container. So we said entered kad. So pasach bekad, it begins with kad. V'siyem b'chavis. And you concluded with a chavis, which means a barrel. So get it straight. Are we dealing with a kad or are we dealing with a chavis? I put the kad in orange and the chavis in purple. You'll notice that the inconsistency there. Question mark. This is a question. Utananami, and we also learned. Now, Utananami, I explained, is basically about to quote a Mishnah. So whenever it says Utananami, in English, you would have had quotes. In the Gemara, it doesn't really do that. It just says Utananami, we also learned, and get ready for the quote. So we learned the Mishnah. It's a Mishnah later on. The Mishnah says, Zeba b'chavise v'zeba b'karasei. This one came with his barrel. Chavis is a barrel. And this one came with his beam. Kaira is a beam. And they're both walking. Both have permission to be there. And that's slightly different than our Mishnah, where the person did not have permission to put it down. But here, both have permission to be there. And Nishbarak, they're walking in a public domain. Nishbarak kadei shalzeh, bekarasi shalzeh. This one's pitcher broke on this one's beam. And the halacha is that he's pater. Okay, if you take a look at this Mishnah that we're quoting, it does exactly the same thing that our Mishnah did. Well, it's not exactly, but it's very, very similar. It says a chavis, he's walking with a barrel, and it concludes that his pitcher broke. So what is it? Is it a barrel or is it a pitcher? So the Gemara over here asks as well, pasach bechavis v'siyem bekad. You started off saying a chavis, that it's a barrel, and you concluded saying that you're talking about a pitcher. So the Gemara is quoting another instance where a Mishnah is inconsistent with the name of the container. In our Mishnah, we started with a kad and finished with a chavis. In this Mishnah, second case, we start with a chavis and we finished with a kad. Pasach bechavis, you opened with a chavis, v'siyem bekad, and you concluded with a kad. Okay, that was the terms again. The terminology, pasach, it's a type of question, which the Gemara is asking, be more consistent. And we also learned this term again, utanan. You see utanan, we have that term. We're about to see it right here now again. Utanan nami. We saw the two cases where it does this so far in our Mishnah, which is Hameiniach hasakad. And in case number 2, it's zeba bechavisai, which is this case number 2. Two people are walking, and the barrel breaks on the beam. We said that the owner of the beam, the one who's carrying the beam rather, doesn't have to pay for the broken barrel. And we said the reason is because they both are allowed to be there. We don't have to get into all the details with who was walking first and who stopped short and all of that. That's the Mishnah a little bit later on. However, the important point for us here is that we see that the Mishnah is inconsistent with its name of the container, if it's a chavis or a kad. Okay, utanan nami, and we also learned, so again, get ready for quotes, because it means we learned in a Mishnah. Whenever it says tanan, it means a Mishnah. That's your term over there. And the Mishnah says, it's much later on in the Masechta, Zeba b'chavisa shel yayin, this one is walking with his barrel of wine, V'zeba b'kadeh shel dvash, and this one is with his pitcher of honey. Now, the assumption is, or the premise to this is that honey is more expensive than wine. I don't know how it is today. Usually you don't buy large containers of honey like you would buy a big bottle of wine. Honey comes in smaller containers, but maybe it's equivalent. In those days, honey was more expensive. So nistika, chavesh shel dvash. The barrel of honey broke. Nistika means it cracked. The barrel cracked. So immediately he sees expensive honey that's dripping out. V'shafach zeyenai, the one with the wine spilled out his wine. Shafach is to spill. V'shafach zeyenai v'hitzeles hadvash. He spills out his wine. Now he has an empty container, and he saves. Hitzel is to save, like hatzala is to save, rescue. And he rescues the honey, l'soichai, into his container of wine. So the halacha is ein layalascharei. He doesn't get paid for his loss of wine. He just spilt out his wine, and now he used it to catch the honey. He doesn't get paid for the loss of wine. All he gets paid is for the usage of the container, and he gets paid as a worker. I guess that means the time that it takes for him to go save this honey. So whatever the halachas are of how fast it's spilling out, and the Mishnah over there discusses that. But our point is that it started with a kad of dvash, and then it says that the chavis of dvash broke. So the Gemara asks again, pasach bekad, v'siyam b'chavis. You opened with a kad, you began with a kad, v'siyam b'chavis, and you finished with a barrel. So you did the same thing. You were inconsistent. Okay, that's the third case of zeba b'chavisa shel yayin. Is again, it starts with a kad and finishes with a chavis. So both case number 1 and number 3 started with a kad and finished with a chavis, and case number 2 started with a chavis and finished with a kad. One of the boys in the class, I think Daniel, pointed out that why does it have to bring all of these cases? And this Tosfos here, which we probably won't learn inside, but that does give a possible, his answer for another question may answer that question as well. Okay, we did not do Amar of Papa, and that we'll leave for tomorrow.